if they were competing, Jim Thorpe against Bo Jackson, Bo would win almost every event because of the differences of 100 years. But in his time period, in 1950, all the sports writers, the Dan Shaughnessy's and Jeff Pearlmans of that era, voted on the greatest athlete of the first half of the 20th century. Not Babe Ruth, not Ty Cobb, not Jack Dempsey, not Jesse Owens, not Jackie Robinson, who was just coming along, but Jim Thorpe was voted the greatest athlete of that first half of the 20th century, that golden era of sports.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this American Inspiration event presented by American Ancestors, New England Historic Genealogical Society, and Boston Public Library, ably produced by GBH Forum Network. I'm Margaret Talcott, Director of Literary Programs at American Ancestors, NEHGS, and producer of the American Inspiration series. All of us behind the scenes are delighted you're with us tonight in the land of history, sports history, looking in depth at two of the greatest ever American athletes. On your screen is the schedule for our hour-long event featuring David Maraniss and Jeff Pearlman. With Boston Globe sports columnist Dan Shaughnessy, they'll be looking at the life and legacy of Jim Thorpe and Bo Jackson. So now turning to introductions, I welcome Kristen Motti from the Boston Public Library. Kristen, over to you.
Thank you, Margaret, and welcome everyone. On behalf of the Boston Public Library, I'm Kristen Motti from the programs team here. It's great to have you all here with us and to be partnering with our Boston-based neighbors on presenting tonight's program. Before we meet our featured authors, I do have the honor of telling you just a little bit about them. David Maraniss is an associate editor at the Washington Post and a distinguished visiting professor at Vanderbilt University. He has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for journalism and was a finalist 3 other times. Among his best-selling books are biographies of Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Roberto Clemente, and Vince Lombardi, and a trilogy about the 1960s, Rome 1960, Once in a Great City, which was a winner of the RFK Book Prize, and They Marched into Sunlight, which was a winner of the J. Anthony Lucas Prize and Pulitzer finalist in history. Jeff Pearlman is the New York Times bestselling author of 10 books, including The Bad Guys 1, Boys Will Be Boys, Showtime, and Sweetness. HBO adapted Showtime, his book on the 1980s Lakers, into a major scripted dramatic series produced and directed by Adam McKay. A former Sports Illustrated senior writer and ESPN.com columnist, Pearlman is the host of Two Writers Slinging Yang podcast, and he blogs regularly at jeffpearlman.com. Now to introduce tonight's moderator, Margaret, back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. As many of you know, our moderator this evening is a sports columnist and associate editor at the Boston Globe. Dan Shaughnessy has been named Massachusetts Sports Writer of the Year 14 times and has 12 times been voted one of America's top 10 sports columnists by the Associated Press sports editors. In 2016, Shaughnessy was the recipient of the BBWAA Career Excellence Award for meritorious contributions to baseball writing, presented at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Dan has written 13 books, including the New York Times bestseller Francona, The Curse of the Bambino, and Senior Year. Lucky gal that I am, I got to interview Dan about Francona before live audiences in Portsmouth, New Hampshire a few years back, so it is a particular pleasure to see him again. Dan's most recent book is Wish It Lasted Forever, Life with the Larry Bird Celtics. It's pictured here, and Dan would be happy to sign copies ordered through Porter Square Books, again using the code AMINS23. We'll hear from Dan, gain his insights, see his referee skills in just a bit. But for now, let's hear from David Maraniss about Jim Thorpe, and then from Jeff Pearlman about Bo Jackson and all Bo knows. David, welcome, and over to you first. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Margaret and Kristen and Dan. And, it's a delight to share the stage with my fellow scribbler, Jeff. wherever I go, when I'm asked about who's the modern day Jim Thorpe, I always say, well, Bo Jackson, and Jeff Pearlman has written a great book about it. So this should be a fun debate. Jim Thorpe, for those who don't know, was from the Sac and Fox Nation in the Indian Territory of what became Oklahoma. The year he was born, 1887. The night he was born, there was a thunderstorm over the North Canadian River in the Indian Territory. And that's where he got his Sac and Fox name, Wathohuk, which is translated into path lit by lightning. He had a lot of lightning in his life, but the path was quite difficult. And the years of his life, from 1887 to 1953, 65 years, those 2 years are the bookends to the way that the United States government treated Native Americans. 1887 was the year the Dawes Act was passed, which took away a lot of tribal properties and tried to turn them into private landowners instead. Much of that private property was then taken away from them again. 1953, the year he died, in a trailer park in Lomita, California, was the year that the U.S. Congress tried to detribalize the entire Indian nations. So from the beginning to end, he had to struggle with the way that the dominant white society treated Native Americans. Now, I'll talk later about his great athletic skills, but I wanted you to know a little bit about his life first. Most of his great athletic achievements came at the dominant Indian boarding school of that era, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This first picture shows Jim Thorpe, third from the right with his C on his chest, sitting in front of his coach, Pop Warner. Many of you perhaps have heard of Pop Warner because of youth football named after him. Warner was a great coach and an awful human being. And you'll see in my book that at the time of Jim's greatest crisis, when after he won his gold medals in Stockholm in 1912, and those medals were taken away from him because he had played minor league baseball, Bush League baseball for 2 seasons in the Eastern Carolina League. Pop Warner lied about it, said he didn't know to save his own reputation. But in fact, it was Warner who had sent Jim and several of the other Indian athletes down to play baseball. But they were sort of codependent in other ways, and Thorpe was the greatest athlete that Pop Warner ever had. Jim Thorpe's life, after his incredible athletic skills, which we'll talk about during the debate, was difficult, as is the afterlife of so many athletes. But his was unique in the sense that he sort of came to represent the struggles of the Native American peoples throughout his life. There's a picture of him after he came back from Stockholm, winning the gold medals, being honored in Carlisle, where he had rose to fame as a track and field star and as a football player. But his life after that, after the taking away of the medals, was just one loss of many in his life. He lost, his tribes lost their land. He lost his medals. His first son, which we'll see in another picture soon, that's Jim Thorpe Jr. He died at age 3 in 1918 in the great influenza epidemic. That was another loss. Jim Thorpe went on to have seven more children, 3 wives, which was 11 children fewer and 2 wives less than his own father, Hiram Thorpe, who had 18 children and 5 wives. But Jim Thorpe here is in Southern California near the end of his life, when he was mostly living on the fringes of the Hollywood studio system. He acted in 70 movies, mostly as an extra, and fought very hard to get the studios to hire actual Native Americans to play the roles of Indians instead of white people dressed up in war paint. So that's essentially Jim Thorpe's life. You could consider it a tragedy in some ways. He struggled with alcohol. He moved from state to state, living in 20 different states, but he kept going and he persevered. And I think in that sense, he sort of came to represent the entire indigenous peoples. In 1915, here he is at the height of his prowess again, a painting of him in 1912 after he'd won his gold medals. But a few years later, there was a statue, the most popular statue in America was called The End of the Trail. And it depicted an Indian slumped on horseback. And the implication was that was the end of the entire race. It didn't happen. At that time, there were fewer than 300,000 Native Americans left. Today, there are several million. They persevered, as did Jim Thorpe through all of his different travails. And so, I think that he today is honored as one of the great athletes in American history. We're going to argue tonight with Jeff about who is greater, Jim Thorpe or Bo Jackson. In many ways, as you'll see in my argument, I don't really care, but I'm going to make the best argument I can. Over to you, Jeff.
Okay, first of all, I do want to say also, along with David, I don't care either. I think it's an interesting debate, but I think they both have their place, and they're both are really important American figures and American athletic icons. And I was thinking it was interesting when David was talking how so many of the greatest athletes really truly do come from hard scrabble backgrounds, and that's not a coincidence at all. There's something, a force that drives them and a desire. And Bo was born in Bessemer, Alabama in 1962. He was one of 12 kids to a woman named Florence Bond. Bo's father, a man named A.D. Adams, lived across town. He was married to another woman when Bo was born. He had very little to do with Bo. And Bo grew up in great poverty. I actually visited his house, where his house was, and it's on a street in as rural as you can imagine, on the outside of Birmingham. He grew up in a 3-room house, not a 3-bedroom house, a 3-room house. And the kids would shift spots on the floor. And a lot of times, Bo and the other kids would wake up with burn marks on their arms and legs from rolling into the kerosene heater, which was the one source of heat in this house. They had a tar paper roof. There was an outhouse where you had to go to the bathroom. They had no running water. And this wasn't in the 1920s or 30s. This is literally late 60s, early 70s, when he was growing up like this. So dirt poor, motivated by a dad who had no interest in him whatsoever. And he was a really bad and troubled kid, like a really bad and troubled kid. He was a kid who loved beating up classmates, who would steal their lunch money, who would take your lunch and then beat you up for the sake of beating you up. And his nickname, Bo, because his name is Vincent Edward Jackson, and his mother named him after Vincent Edwards from the show Ben Casey, the actor Vincent Edwards, which is his favorite TV show. But his nickname Bo is one of my favorite stories, actually, is one day him and a bunch of his friends, when they were about 8 years old, there was a neighboring farm down the street and around a bend where this farmer kept these enormous hogs. And Bo, it's a grotesque story, but Bo and his friends decided they wanted to see how long it would take them to kill the biggest hog with sticks. And for 3 straight days, they kept coming back with these sticks and just beating the crap out of the farmer's biggest hog. And on the 3rd day, someone came, a guy who worked for the farmer caught them and came running over, and they started scurrying away. And Bo's nickname from that day was Bo, which is short for boar hog, because in Bessemer, Alabama, they would refer to a boar hog as a bow hog for short. So Bo was bequeathed Bo Jackson, and he really kind of liked that nickname. And his motivation, he was not a kid who played a lot of sports. He ran around a lot. There's a lot of, I wrote a biography of Walter Payton. I wrote a biography of Brett Favre, 2 other guys from the Deep South. And Bo is the 3rd athlete I've written about from the Deep South, all from a relatively similar era. And what all these guys had in common was there was no IMG Academy. There were no personal trainers. Nobody was saying with Jim Thorpe, obviously. Nobody was coming along identifying you and saying, this guy, we're going to sign this guy up and we're going to send him off and we're going to make Bo Jackson a football player. We're just going to put all the resources, year-round training. Like, Bo was running from other kids, running after other kids. He was leaping over ditches. I talked to his neighbor, one of his neighbors from back then, a woman who said she just remembers him standing on the street and throwing rocks way down the street. So that was his training, crabapple fights, running over ditches, throwing rocks at people. He became an elite high school high jumper and, a state record holder. And really what did it is his mom, he moved into another house, his mom did, and there was a 5-foot fence around the house. And the entrance and exit to the fence, his mom could see from her room. So Bo would go to the back of the house and flat foot jump over the fence and credited that for his jumping ability. So a lot of these things that these athletes develop, I'm sure it's the same with Jim Thorpe to a degree, are these really organic, crude, rudimentary athletic tests. So Bo ended up going to McAdory High School in Bessemer, outside of Bessemer, and wasn't a particularly well-known athlete as a young kid. He was a year older than most of the people in his grade because he got held back. His first sport was track. He was really good at it. And it wasn't until it was one of these situations, like when I wrote the Brett Favre biography, Favre's dad was a football coach where he went to high school in the Kill, Mississippi, and his dad just ran the ball all the time. So Brett Favre on average was throwing 6 times a game. Bo Jackson, you have Bo Jackson, but the football coach had 2 other running backs he liked just as much. So throughout his high school career, Bo Jackson was really carrying the ball 7, 8, 9 times a game. It wasn't that much, but he was a freakish athlete who did all these things, started getting buzz in local newspapers. And he had only left the state of Alabama one time his entire boyhood through high school. And it was to visit Six Flags in Atlanta with his girlfriend on a class trip. So he was only going to go to Auburn and Alabama. Those are the 2 schools, and they were both recruiting him. This is Bear Bryant was a coach at Alabama. Pat Dye was a new coach at Auburn. And he took a visit to Alabama. Bear Bryant was not very interested in him. He didn't go down to see him. He made Bo come up to the top. They sent the defensive coordinator to his house. He said to Bo, listen, we really see you as much as a defensive player, as an offensive player. If you're going to be a running back, you're probably not going to even see the field until your sophomore, maybe junior year. Pat Dye, meanwhile, was trying to scrap together a program at Auburn. He said, if you come here, you're going to be elite. You have a chance to start right away. It wasn't a hard decision for the kid. He goes to Auburn. He's a mega star. He runs while he's there, we'll get into this, but he runs a 4.13 40, which there's no one in the NFL right now who can run a 4.13 40. You can take Tyreek Hill, strip him of all his clothing, put on track cleats. He's not running a 4.13 40. And Bo was doing this at 220 pounds. And obviously he goes on, I'll talk about this later, defies the odds, plays for the Kansas City Royals, is fantastic. Signs with the Raiders, the Los Angeles Raiders, is fantastic. Plays in the Major League All-Star game, plays in the Pro Bowl, has 90-plus yard runs in his career. Just a miraculous, freakishly good athlete who wins the Heisman Trophy, obviously at Auburn, and is an athletic legend. And sadly, his career was cut very short because of a hip injury in a 1991 NFL playoff game between the Bengals and the Raiders. But I think had that not happened, we're looking at a guy who's probably the first ever inductee into the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Football Hall of Fame, both, so he's an all-time great and a legend. Dan, what do you got? I missed that line, sorry.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. That was great, guys. I could let these guys go on all night. I'm just going to try and stay out of the way here. And again, Margaret layered this thing already with just these great authors we have in our midst here, and it's daunting to be with you guys. But I could just do this for a couple hours and just try to hit some talking points. I'll start with you, David. I mean, your biographies that I know of, Lombardi and Clemente, not living at the time you did them, but a lot of people knew them, and you could round them up. What was the charge of somebody who died 70 years ago? What was that like to try and string together a biography of someone who hasn't been with us in so long?
It was completely different, Dan. I talk about the 4 legs of the table I use when I'm researching a book. And I couldn't use 2 of the legs this time very much. Well, the first leg is go there, wherever there is. Well, during the research for this book was COVID times. I don't know how Jeff did with that, but, I could not go to Stockholm where COVID was raging when I wanted to, nor to Oklahoma. For the Lombardi book, which was the first of my sports biographies, I had been covering Bill Clinton in 1996, and the day after the election, I turned to my wife and said, "How would you like to move to Green Bay for the winter?" I've been making up to her ever since, going to Puerto Rico for Clemente and Rome for Rome 1960 and Vietnam and other places. But for this book, it was different. I could not go live in Oklahoma, and I did not get to Stockholm. although we're finally going to go this summer, a little too late. And the other part that was difficult or different was the interviews. For my Lombardi and my book on Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Clemente, for all of those, I interviewed 200 to 450 people, all over. And for this book, none of his 7 children are alive. Many of his grandchildren are even gone. And so the family was less important, although I never rely entirely on the family in any case. But all of his contemporaries were also gone. So, there were a few people like Dan, your colleague, Lee Montville, who had memories of Jim Thorpe when they were kids. At one point, Lee heard on the radio that Jim Thorpe was ailing and needed help, and at least saved up all his pennies and sent them to the right place to help the great Jim Thorpe. But just stories like that I could hear of people who were kids, but not really the gist of who Jim Thorpe was. I relied more than ever on oral histories and archival materials, primary documents. I went to 20 different archives over the course of this, many of them before COVID. And then when COVID hit, luckily a lot more really important primary documents more than ever are online. All of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School records of the government I could get digitally, which really helped. But you're right, this book, unlike any I've done, really made me be more creative in trying to find the real story.
Thank you. And Jeff, we're in the process here, and your stuff. You came all the way to Boston to sit down with me about Roger Clemens a million years ago. We sat at the Pancake House somewhere on Soldiers Field Road and talked about him. And you've done multiple sports biographies. Now, in this case, a guy who's alive, kind of a reluctant guy. How did it work with you and Bo? You and Bo's friends? How was that process for you?
Well, first of all, I want to say I could never do what David did. And I mean that as 100 million% compliment. I couldn't do it. The level of research, the level of digging, my whole thing is, I learned when I was at Sports Illustrated. I remember I had a colleague, Gary Smith, and his whole philosophy, a great writer, was always make the next call, always make the next call, always make the next call. So I'm really about always make, with books, especially always make the next call. One of the first people I reached out to was Bo Jackson. I sent him a bunch of my books. I wrote him a note. It was during the pandemic, just like David, same thing. And one day I'm in my backyard in California and I get a call from a number I don't recognize. I was actually on the line with my mom, and I don't know why. I was like, I bet this is Bo Jackson. And I answered the call and it says, Jeff Pearlman. And I was like, Bo Jackson. And he's like, yeah, it's me. And we talked for a long time. He was driving to get his wife a salad. He lives outside of Chicago. And he said, I get asked these things all the time. I really enjoy my privacy. And he said the magic words, which are, I don't have a problem with you doing this. I'm just not going to cooperate. And I think as both of you guys was, as long as you can tell people when they ask, does Bo know you're working on the book? It sort of opens up a lot. It's one thing if the person says, I don't want you doing this, but he didn't say that. He said, I'm not going to help. But he literally said something like, I don't have a problem with you doing it. I'm just not going to. So whenever I would call people and they would say, does Bo know you're doing this? Yes, Bo does know. Is he helping you? No, but he said, I'm okay with it. So one of the first things I do, I don't know if you guys are the same way. I go to eBay and I buy everything. So every Auburn media guide, every Royals media guide, every Raiders media guide. And if you looked at the laptop I'm doing this on, you'll find a file. I'm old and I do Word, but for every single person in every media guide. And then it's a process of literally going name by name by name by name and calling every person. Hey, this is Jeff Pearlman. Hey, this is Jeff Pearlman. I feel like texting has made it a little easier. People never answer their calls anymore if they don't recognize a number. So what I really do now is I will text someone with a photo of their bio in the media guide, like the Auburn media guide, because it shows you're not just some weirdo. I mean, you're a weirdo, but you're a weirdo who actually, has been doing some research. And I just hit up everybody. And I also, at the same time, you build a Bo Jackson library, right? Like, I'm sure David has one of the leading Jim Thorpe libraries in the world on his laptop in his office. I think I probably have the biggest, to my wife's great dismay, Bo Jackson libraries in my office, just piles and piles of books and clips. So you're calling everyone, you're building up this library, and then you just dig into it. And I'm sure like David too, like you end up being the worst person at any party because all you want to do is talk about, all I want to do is talk about Bo Jackson. Nobody wants to hear about it, you know? So, but it's very similar. It's just a dogged process.
These things do take over your life. When working on a book in my world, it's the last thing I think about when I go to bed. The first thing I'm thinking about in the morning, it takes over your life. And God bless you guys for cranking out so many of these good things. And if any of you follow Jeff on Twitter, you know, I follow Jeff on Twitter. It was like I wrote the book with him. I mean, every step of the way, he was sending out stuff like, here's what I'm doing now. Here's my library. The writing process starts. It was really kind of fun to follow it through. And I've got the book right over here to my left. And it's like, he gave birth to this thing. I remember I felt like I walked through the whole thing with you. So thank you for sharing on that. David, Jim Thorpe, I'm a baby boomer. You're a baby boomer. And we all had this image of him from a film. What was the story with the film about the Jim Thorpe story that was out when we were kids?
Yeah, you're right, Dan. Either the film or so many people that I've told I was writing a book about Jim Thorpe would say, oh, I read a book about him in 3rd or 4th grade.
Yeah.
And that's about it, those two things. Let me say, first of all, you know, in terms of that obsession you were talking about, one time I was driving with my wife, and instead of turning on the street, I turned into a fire station. And she literally slapped me around and said, what chapter are you on? You know, I mean, that's the level of obsession that comes with this. And she was right. I was on chapter 12 at that point. So the film 1951, Jim Thorpe, All-American, fascinating film because it starred Burt Lancaster, a real movie star, and it was directed by Michael Curtiz, who directed Casablanca, not bad. And it was sympathetic to Thorpe, but it was wrong in every possible respect.
Yeah.
Little things like, you know, at the beginning, I mean, supposedly at his home in Oklahoma, they show a teepee. The Sac and Fox didn't live in teepees. In the background, not Oklahoma, but the San Gabriel Mountains of California. You know, so every possible little thing was wrong. But as I alluded to earlier, what was most wrong is that the narrator of the film, and in this essence, the hero of the film, is not Jim Thorpe, it's Pop Warner. And the implication of the movie is if only Thorpe had listened to Pop and more successfully insinuated himself into white society, he wouldn't have suffered the way he did in the future. And when after I had already researched everything that Pop Warner did wrong by Jim Thorpe, that just infuriated me and soured me on the movie. But, you know, a lot of people see it and say, well, it's kind of sympathetic to Jim Thorpe. And so they were moved to love Jim Thorpe because of that movie. That's just fine. It just happens to be completely wrong.
And what was his Achilles heel in his life, Jim Thorpe?
Well, you might say it was alcohol.
Yeah.
He did drink too much, and it cost him over the years. It cost him his first 2 wives, who left him because of his drinking, and also because he wasn't around much. But he wasn't around much because he was struggling to survive and trying to, you know, he kept trying to be an athlete up into his mid 40s, and traveling like the teams that he played on, like the Oorang Indians of a small town in Ohio. So many of the teams, or the Harjo's Indians, which was a baseball team from Oklahoma, they were just a traveling road show, which was so common in that era, you know, kind of like the Negro Leagues. He played against all the great Negro League stars in baseball with that traveling road show. But that was sort of, with the struggles with alcohol and with always being gone, his personal life was always difficult.
And little known fact, before we come back to Jeff here, Jim Thorpe, if I'm not mistaken, played baseball in Boston the same time Babe Ruth was playing baseball in Boston. He was like a mile down the street at Braves Field, correct? Yeah,
not only that, but, you know, here we get to who's the greatest athlete. Thorpe's best sport was not baseball. He was a brilliant all-around track star and football player, and a good baseball player who played in the major leagues. And the best season he ever had was in Boston in 1919. Babe Ruth starring on the Red Sox. Jim Thorpe finally out from under the thumb of John McGraw of the New York Giants, who never played him enough, got his chance with the Boston Braves in 1919 and led the league in hitting almost the entire year. Batting .327, stealing a lot of bases, playing good on defense. That was by far his best year. And tragically, ironically, that was also his last year in the major leagues.
Back to you, Jeff, and going to where David and I just went with the image and the film in this case. I mean, Bo's image was shaped by Nike, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that was kind of a seismic shift in his life, I would imagine. What component did that play in his life, in your view?
Oh, enormous. And the thing I love is, everyone knows Bo knows. People still know Bo knows. My son literally wears a Bo knows shirt, which is kind of funny. And 1989, Bo Jackson was voted to start his only All-Star game. He was the American League's leading vote-getter. And one of the great moments in marketing and athletic synergy history would be Nike is going to premiere their big Bo knows ad campaign for that game. And it's the ad with Bo Diddley. It's the whole Bo, you don't know Diddley campaign with Bo Diddley. And it's all the athletes one by one. It's Kirk Gibson and Wayne Gretzky and Michael Jordan. They're all like, Bo knows basketball, Bo knows baseball, that whole thing. And it's going to take place in the 1989 All-Star game. And they do this big ad buy. And if you open the old, program for the 89 All-Star game, there's a whole Bo knows thing all around the stadium. They have Bo knows stuff hanging up. And Tony La Russa, the day before the game, he's the American League manager. He pulls Wade Boggs, the Red Sox third baseman, and Bo aside, and he tells him that Bo is going to lead off. Now, Bo is not a leadoff hitter by any stretch of the imagination, but for the moment, Bo is going to lead off. So it's the 1989 All-Star game. It's in Southern California. It's at Angel Stadium. It's a perfect afternoon. It's blue skies. In the booth is Vin Scully and Ronald Reagan, recently done as the 40th president of the United States. And Bo Jackson leads off. Rick Russell is on the mound, 40-year-old Rick Russell of the San Francisco Giants. Throws a slider, first pitch, ball one. Second pitch, Bo Jackson hits a ball, takes a swing, beautiful, perfect swing. He looks like a god. He's like, his muscles are bursting out of his white Royals uniform. He's got the blue wristbands, perfect. He hits this ball dead center over Eric Davis's head, playing center field, onto the black in center field. Fans come scurrying for it. And he's rounding the bases, just looking godlike. And at that moment, all the Nike executives were watching the game at Mickey Mantle's restaurant in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And they're watching the game on the TV there, and they start going crazy. They are jumping up and down in the restaurant because it's an amazing moment. And the inning ends, and a couple of innings later, the Bo knows ad campaign comes on. The Bo, you don't know Diddley, for the first time. Bo Jackson winds up winning the MVP of that game. And it's just one of the great moments. And the beauty of that ad campaign, truly, Bo Jackson was a kid with a severe stutter growing up. Yeah. He was never overly comfortable speaking. He's gotten much better through the years. But if you watch the campaign, it's based around two words, Bo knows. Bo rarely speaks in any of the ads. He wasn't overly charismatic. It was really about sort of him as this exceptional athlete doing something no one else had done in the modern era, which is, playing baseball, playing football at this high level. And it was awesome. People still know that ad campaign.
Yeah, that never goes away. And I was interested in the stutter because those of us who interviewed him in that period in the 80s, it was fairly pronounced. Do you think it contributed to his shyness, or was he just that way anyway?
Oh, definitely. I mean, he was made fun of as a kid. He had a teacher when he was in elementary school who Bo did something, got in trouble, and the teacher made him stand in front of the class and recite a poem, knowing he had a stutter, just to sort of torture him. So this was way before the modern era. There were no speech therapists in Bessemer, Alabama, to help a kid at 8 years old in 1970. So for years, he really wore that and was very self-conscious about speaking in public. And actually what happened is he got to Auburn. I don't know if you guys know David Housel. He's a very well-known sports information director at Auburn, became the athletic director. And he hooked Bo up with theater professors at Auburn. And Bo took a couple of theater and public speaking classes, and that really sort of flipped it for him. Up to that point, he would try rushing through things. If he was stuttering on something, he would try rushing through it. And for the first time, he was learning, you don't want to rush through it. You take your time. So you take a deep breath. you wait, you pause, you work your way through it slowly. And if you hear Bo interviewed now, you can actually see him doing that. He speaks very deliberately, very slowly, very casually. And you wouldn't know he has a stutter. You would just think he's a very deliberate speaker.
Wow. Back to you, David. With the athleticism of Jim Thorpe, I mean, it's always the period their grade in versus today's, and it's hard for these things to translate. And I mean, I remember Jim Beeman, beating the long jump record by 2 feet, the Mexico City Olympics, 1968. It stood up until I think Carl Lewis beat it like 30 years later or something. But in your view, like with Thorpe's athleticism, decathlon, the Olympic stuff, what was his best event, and what would today he still compete in?
Well, you're right. It's really difficult to compare statistics from one generation to the other. I mean, Jeff did say that Bo sort of got his talents organically and didn't train that much. But once he got to Auburn, he probably lifted weights. Jim Thorpe never did. I would say probably in track and field, I mean, it was just that he was good at everything. He wasn't the best at any individual event, but at those Stockholm Olympics, he defeated the competition by a wider margin than any decathlete before or since.
Yeah.
The long jump was probably his best event. This might argue against I'm debating against myself here for Jeff, but going back to baseball, the longest home run I ever saw, Bo Jackson hit.
You were there?
It was in spring training.
I was there.
At Baseball City.
I was there.
It went over the center field fence.
Oil Can Boyd.
And over the backstop of the next diamond.
I can't believe you were at that game.
It was what, 550 feet or something like that? It was. I just happened to be there and saw that home run. But Jim Thorpe, well, here's the myth, and Jeff's title has myth in it. Jim Thorpe used to say, and people would say, that he once hit home runs in 3 separate states in the same ball game. He was playing in Texarkana, and the story went, he hit one into Arkansas, one into Texas, and one into Oklahoma. Great story. Physically impossible. Oklahoma is 23 miles away. I don't think he hit it 23 miles. But in any case, but Bo's best sport by far was football. And Jim Thorpe's best sport by far was football. And, he was an All-American twice at Carlisle School. They were playing the greatest teams in college football in that era. It wasn't Auburn and Georgia and Alabama. It was Penn and Yale and West Point and Harvard. Those were the great football teams of that era. And he beat them all, including West Point, when their star player, or one of their great players, was Dwight David Eisenhower. Wow. And Eisenhower had plotted before the game that they would knock Jim Thorpe out by tackling him high and low at the same time. They tried. They did knock him to the ground. He was woozy. He got up, kept playing, and knocked Eisenhower out of the game. And Ike never played football again.
Oh, my God. Jeff, we're going to have to give you equal time before we go to our next thing, which is best sport for Bo. And that Oil Can Boyd home run, I can't believe David Maraniss was at that game. You know who else was at that game? The first pitch was thrown out by Barbara Billingsley, the mom on Leave It to Beaver. She threw out the first in Baseball City, Red Sox against Kansas City Royals. Jim Rice hit one like 2 innings later that bounced off the scoreboard. It looked like it was nothing compared to what Bo had done innings earlier. So you and I talked about the Oil Can home run, but best sport for Bo.
Why do I say it went 515 feet? That's what it was measured, which is so preposterous. And I found there was a guy working in the parking lot who wound up with the ball.
There were like cows out there. There was a cow pasture.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I think Bo's best sport was football. The thing about Bo in baseball, as impressive as he was and as crazy as the things he did, is he was really raw. I mean, I spoke with George Brett early on. He said he never really learned how to play baseball. There was one game when he was literally with the Kansas City Royals, and there was a balk on the pitcher, and he did not know what to do. Like, he didn't understand what a balk was. He had very crude outfield routes. He didn't know the game. He was a natural athlete playing baseball at a high level because he was a natural athlete. But football, won the Heisman Trophy winner. He was the number 1 overall pick in the '86 draft by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think you can make the argument he's in the discussion for the greatest college football player of all time. I don't know if he'd win it, but he's in the discussion. I always say this, which is amazing. He shows up with the Raiders He basically played with the Royals. The Royals, he made him really angry because he signed in 87. The Raiders took a flyer, drafted him in the 7th round. So all right, I'll play with you. It'll be a hobby. He shows up with the Raiders, 1987 strike season. And one of my favorite stories actually from the book is for a few days, the Raiders had their replacement players and the returnees in training camp together. And the idea was that the replacement players would help the returnees get used to it. So Matt Millen is back and Rod Martin are back. They're playing linebacker in these drills. And all they want to do is beat the snot out of the replacement running backs. So running back one takes a handoff, bam, they beat the snot out of the replacement. You suck, you're nothing. Another running back takes it, bam, you suck. Third running back takes the handoff. He just blows past Matt Millen. Matt Millen gets back to the huddle. He's like, I don't know what's wrong with me, guys. I'm sorry. They run it again. Same running back takes the handoff. Boom, gone. Matt Millen's like, I don't know what's wrong with me, guys. I'm so sorry. And Rod Martin looks at him and goes, you dumbass, that's Bo Jackson. And Matt Millen's like, oh, thank God. And he was a 220-pound man running a 4.1 40. Early in training camp, Tom Flores, the head coach of the Raiders, wanted Bo to run a 40. He ran a 4.19 on grass in pads. Flores said, I don't buy it. Count it off, do it again. And he ran a 4.17 in pads on grass, which is preposterous. So his football skills were so otherworldly. He would have been a Hall of Famer in football. Baseball's questionable, but football, he would have been one of the great running backs of all time.
Perfect. So now I'm supposed to do the last call for both of you guys because we're going to get to the poll question, who's the greatest American athlete, blah, blah, blah. We're going to take your questions from the wonderful audience out there. Before we do that, each guy, it's lightning round here. You get like 1 minute. I know you're not being competitive here. It's great. But so David, you first. Why is Jim Thorpe the greatest American athlete?
Because no one has done what Jim Thorpe did. Even Bo Jackson didn't win 2 gold medals in the decathlon and pentathlon, play Major League Baseball and National Football League star. So that trilogy of talents is something that no one else has ever done. And, Bo was also a great ice skater. I don't know. I mean, Jim was. I don't know if Bo, you can say that about Bo. He was a great swimmer up in Lawrence, Mass. When he was playing baseball. During one summer, he saved 4 people from drowning. He was a great ballroom dancer. He even was good at marbles. Jim Thorpe could do everything, but that triple play of track and field, football, and baseball, even Bo Jackson didn't win those gold medals.
All right, Jeff Pearlman, take that. Marbles and ballroom dancing. What do you got?
I can't compete with marbles and ballroom dancing. What I can tell you is Bo Jackson shows up at Auburn. I just want to say he shows up at Auburn. And he runs track as a freshman, and he runs the 60, his first event, without training, without any practice, and he runs the 5th fastest time in the school's history. Runs a 6.18 60, qualifies for the Olympic trials on his first ever 60. He won the Heisman Trophy. He was a 2nd round pick of the Yankees out of high school. Would have been the number 1 pick overall, but they knew he was going to Auburn. Then was the number 1 pick of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in football. As I said, he ran a 4.13 40. He never lifted weights, just like Jim Thorpe, never lifted weights. And I guess the argument I can make that is an unfair argument because their time periods are different. So I do want to say, David, it is an unfair argument. But if we're just doing better athlete, I don't think Jim Thorpe beats Bo Jackson in anything. Now, he came along later. Their training regimens are different. But I don't think if you look at the times, the strengths, and Jim Thorpe is amazing, and he's a much more influential athlete than Bo Jackson. I will 100%. I don't think he beats him in anything. I think if they went head-to-head in 10 events, I will say this last thing. During his junior year of high school, Bo Jackson won the state decathlon championship, Alabama. He won it again as a senior, setting 3 state track and field all-time records. His senior year, he did it in sweatpants. Just to mention, he won the state decathlon in sweats. He didn't do the last event, the 1500, because he hated distance running. So he was so far ahead, he didn't have to. He sprained his ankle while doing it. The next day, the baseball team needed a guy to pitch in a state playoff game. Bo had not pitched all year. He started and struck out 13 in the win. So I'm just saying, Thorpe is amazing. Bo is amazing. But if I had to go in like a 10 event decathlon, I'm going Bo.
Yeah, I'm sure he was wearing penny loafers when he won the decathlon.
And he was wearing loafers.
Dan, let us do one more quick lightning round, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Jeff's absolutely right. If they were competing, Jim Thorpe against Bo Jackson, Bo would win almost every event because of the differences of 100 years. But in his time period, in 1950, all the sports writers, the Dan Shaughnessy's and Jeff Pearlmans of that era, voted on the greatest athlete of the first half of the 20th century. Not Babe Ruth, not Ty Cobb, not Jack Dempsey, not Jesse Owens, not Jackie Robinson, who was just coming along, but Jim Thorpe was voted the greatest athlete of that first half of the 20th century, that golden era of sports.
I love that he came back for the lightning round. That was so great. So,
Hey, Dan, can I say one more thing?
oh, of course.
Okay. If anyone who's watching this goes to YouTube and types in Bo Jackson and wall, July 11th, 1990, in a game in Baltimore.
Spider-Man, I know this one.
Literally climbed up a wall, ran across the wall, and ran down the wall. Nobody's done it before. Nobody's done it since. I'm actually being serious. Nobody has done it since. So when Jim Thorpe runs up a wall, runs across the wall, runs down the wall, I'll be happy to talk Thorpe.
That is fair. That is fair.
Yeah.
All right. At this point in the proceedings, we now throw it out to our audience, which is who is the greatest American athlete? You know, cast your vote. You got the poll and whatever. We'll have something for you at the end of that. And don't be skewered by now versus then. Just listen, take what you've heard and what you've read in these great books and let us know. And at this point now, while you're doing that, we're going to take some of your questions, and I'm looking at what we got here. So you guys can, just jump in when you have an answer. So first question comes from somebody in our webinar chat. What American athletes do you think are most importantly, historically, not as athletes, but in terms of social or cultural impact? Who are the athletes that affect that, not just performance, but social and cultural impact?
Well, that's a pretty easy one. I mean, I'm sure Jeff and I agree. Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, probably either Billie Jean King or Babe Didrikson for women.
Jesse Owens, obviously.
Jesse Owens, sure. Yep.
Yeah,
One.
it's very comprehensive. I would say modern day, I think Venus Williams was a very important and significant athlete in sort of the progression of, I think, people thinking of women in the terms they think of men as far as their athleticism, their skill, and their importance. But yeah, it's a good list.
That's a very good point. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw in Bill Russell and
that's a great one too.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, all the Cleveland Summit guys. It was kind of a big thing. It's fresh in our memories here. So,
Jackie's probably in a place by himself, but the others are all really important.
This one's probably more for Jeff. If Bo Jackson hadn't gotten injured, do you think he would have continued playing both football and baseball? And which would he have been better at?
I actually think he would have. He talked about not playing football that much longer. He wasn't a big city guy. He did not love LA. He also was very aware of sort of the injury potential of football. So I do think ultimately he would have been and he loved baseball. It's weird or not weird. He loved the rhythms of baseball. He loved being in an outfield. He loved the time. He loved being on a bench and chatting with his teammates. If you look at who his closest friends from his sporting career were, almost none of them were football players. There was George Brett, there's Mark Gubiza, Brett Saberhagen, Tim Raines. So I think ultimately he would have wound up having a very long and productive baseball career, more than football.
This one's for David. What is the current status of Jim Thorpe's legacy, his Olympic medals? Where are the medals?
Well, the medals is a good question, but what's important is that the records were finally restored. They were denied him for decades. First, it was Pop Warner and everybody who caused the medals to be returned. Then Avery Brundage, the arch villain of Olympic history, who was for decades the head of the International Olympic Committee, refused to give Jim Thorpe back his medals and records. Finally, in 1983, before the 84 Los Angeles Olympics, they sort of half-heartedly gave his children replica medals, but did not put him back into the record books. And it was only in 2022, 6 months ago, that the Olympics finally restored everything, including the records he set in 1912. but the medals themselves, his family never saw.
All right, this is kind of for both of you guys. Who were others? I know you guys wrote books on these great athletes, and that's kind of our debate's been framed by the great David Black, who Jeff and I share as a literary agent, proposed this idea for debate, which is working beautifully, I must say. But if we're to open it up in your own world or your own views, I mean, who else is in the conversation? The greatest athlete, greatest American athlete ever?
I mean, I would say certainly, well, obviously Jim Thorpe. I think Jesse Owens is there. I think Carl Lewis is there. Weirdly, I think you could make a very strong modern case for LeBron James if you look at the athleticism, the freakishness, and the longevity. And I think you can start talking about Serena Williams as, you know, just in the conversation. If we talk about athleticism, longevity, and impact, I would say those are some of the people who come to my mind.
Yeah, those are good. You know, I would also put in Althea Gibson and Babe Didrikson among the women, who were just terrific, all-around great athletes.
You must be looking at the questions here. That was my next question, David. You're killing me here. You know, the greatest American female athletes, which of course we got to give our due to here. So thanks for throwing that out there. One here is and you know, you guys have kind of gotten to this. Should the abilities of the athletes across the ages have consideration in terms of training methods, equipment at the time? You know, how much does that play into Thorpe versus Jackson?
Oh, enormously. I mean, not just train. I mean, Jeff made a good argument about Bo sort of not dealing with all that stuff. But, you know, in terms of diet, training, all of the ways that athletes are groomed for it, you know, from an early age, it's all completely different today, but especially diet. And that has mostly to do with, you know, how big they are and everything else, you know, their strength. Jim Thorpe was, for his time, a big guy, but he was only 6 feet and 189 pounds at his prime. And he was fast and strong. He had that combination of speed and strength that Bo Jackson also has. But I don't think you can really compare. I mean, you can't basketball players. You can't compare football players. The size and speed, especially, is just so different today. But I think you can only really compare athletes from people of their own generation.
I also think there's a real, you see it obviously with younger sports fans, and I get it. The recency bias is annoying and ridiculous. Like people will be, you know, like you could look at a guy like a Charles Barkley, just as an example, or Larry Bird. I was saying this to my son the other day, who's 16. It would be hard for a 16-year-old kid to look at Barkley and Bird as two examples and think those guys were great. Like those guys were great, you know, like those were great athletes. But if you took Barkley and you took Bird and you gave them 2023 training mechanisms, diets, everything, I think they'd still be great. But people from past decades look different. They're smaller. They're not as muscular. Bo Jackson, actually a weird exception, who probably would be pretty great today, but they're just, the different times don't always add up. But if you took Bill Russell, Dan, to take a guy from your universe and zapped him into modern times, just as he was, I don't think if he makes an NBA roster, he's certainly not what he was. But if you gave him a year here and have him work and train and everything, I think he'd be fantastic. Yeah,
I'm going to say he's pretty darn good today too. I think, you know, he's 6'10". He was a great high jumper. So the skill set, in my view, translates because he didn't need the ball, didn't put the ball to the floor, defender, shot blocker. I think that skill set translates today. David, there's one for you. Any comments on the tragic Carlisle Indian School?
Oh, that's at the heart of my book. The motto of that school was "Kill the Indian, save the man." Its whole effort was to take Native American children, shear them of their locks, take away their religion, their language, their culture, and turn them into white people. That was the government policy from 1879, when Carlisle was formed, until the mid 20th century. And Carlisle was the flagship government Indian boarding school of that era. Just in the last couple of years, the whole issue of the Indian boarding schools has come to the fore again, with the Pope going to Canada and apologizing for the Canadian boarding schools, which were doing much the same thing. The most haunting moment of my reporting for this book was to go to Carlisle and walk through the student cemetery. So many of those students thought they were being sent east from the Lakota tribes to die. And many of them did die. And that cemetery has over 180 of the bones of young Native Americans who died while they're at that boarding school.
Goodness. And for Jeff, I get, well, actually for both guys here, but the component of being an American Indian, being a Black man in America, I mean, how much did that play a factor in their lives, would you say, to climb the ladder and to succeed? How big a deal was that in their lives?
I'll say for Bo, it's very interesting because he never really addressed it. He wasn't one to talk about it that much, to talk about politics, to talk about sort of the challenges of being Black in America. But I thought about this a lot when I was working on the book. He's a kid who grew up dirt poor to a mom who worked as a maid who held multiple jobs. She never had an opportunity. She went to crappy schools growing up because being Black in the South meant you went to underfunded schools. She never had a chance to go to college because there was no even acknowledgement that college was a possibility for someone who's poor and Black in the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama. So everything, Bo Jackson growing up, he never had a chance for speech therapy because if you were poor and Black growing up in Bessemer, Alabama, you weren't going to have therapy. You weren't going to have behavioral therapy. You weren't going to have access to these things. So a lot of what he did and a lot of what he overcame had precisely involved being poor, being Black in the 1960s and 70s in Alabama, even if he never addressed it.
So last one for you, David, same topic.
Yeah. Oh, well, Jim Thorpe, like all Native Americans, had to deal with all the stereotypes. He was always, the press always said he was on the warpath taking scalps. Mm. Like every indigenous athlete, he was called chief. He wasn't a chief. And he suffered through sort of attempts to humiliate him throughout his life. But I will say that there's one important difference between Bo Jackson and Jim Thorpe, between African Americans and Native Americans. Both suffered forms of genocide and horrible discrimination, but Native Americans were diminished and romanticized at the same time, unlike African Americans. So that, Jim Thorpe could go give a speech in Jackson, Mississippi to the Touchdown Club in the 1940s, when the only Blacks who were allowed in there were the waiters. So there was always that difference. So many white Americans like to claim that they have Indian blood, quote unquote. You don't hear them claiming they have Black blood. So there is that difference in the romanticization of the Native American.
Dan, can I say one more thing real quick?
Yes.
When Bo was at Auburn his sophomore year, his roommate was Lionel Little Train James, a running back who went on to play in the NFL. And that year they were taking the athletic dormitory and they were doing refurbishment. So they housed all the football players in trailers all around Auburn, throughout Auburn. And one day, Pat Dye, the head coach of Auburn, pulled Lionel James and Bo Jackson aside. I talked to Lionel about this before he passed away and said, I know you guys are dating white women. I personally don't have a problem with it. We brought you here to Auburn, which is 98% white, but I think a lot of people do. We're going to put you on in a trailer far away from campus so people aren't aware of this and won't see this. And I just think I talked to Lionel James about this too, how you're dying for your football team. You're dying for your school. You're getting beaten up. You're breaking fingers. You're breaking toes. And you wonder to yourself, would any of these fans want me dating their daughters? Would these fans have me over for Thanksgiving? Would they have me over for Christmas? And he knew in asking that, a lot of times the answer was a very definitive no. So,
wow. Well, this has been a treat, and two guys that are great authors, tremendous accomplishments here. It's been really fun going back and forth. I've learned a lot. Thank you for your books. Thank you for hanging out with us here. Jeff, you're not going to believe this poll just came back. I mean, this is a GBH old school audience here. So the poll came back. Jim Thorpe, the greatest American athlete, according to our audience who have voted in. And there's been there's been 100 votes. And Bo Jackson got 24%. Jim Thorpe got 76%. So it's an old school audience here. David wins, you lose. And it's been a treat here, and I'm going to throw it back to Margaret now.
Gentlemen, that was amazing. I mean, what a great portrait you've given us of sports history and also of American history. We did get an advanced question, a bit of a criticism. Why were we turning this into any sort of discussion of race? And I just don't think there's a way around that. And I think it's actually appropriate in Black History Month to be looking at all aspects of this. And so we thank you for looking at these gentlemen, these amazing athletes, 360. So thank you. And a reminder to our audience that copies of our featured books, the New York Times bestsellers, Path Lit by Lightning, The Life of Jim Thorpe by David Maraniss, and Jeff Pearlman's biography, The Last Folk Hero, The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson, are available from our partners at Porter Square Books, along with Dan Shaughnessy's book, Wish It Lasted Forever, Life with the Larry Bird Celtics. If you'd like your copies signed by these authors, do input the code AMINST23 as you order each of the titles. You will need to order them separately. There's no 3-for-1 bundle here. Their books are great companions for these dark winter days and the perfect gift for any sports lover in your life. Okay, back to tonight. Truly winding down to all our presenters and partners. Thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed hearing from you, Jeff Pearlman, David Maraniss, Dan Shaughnessy, and Maureen Cole. Thank you. Thank you to the two Andrews, Frederic behind the scenes, WGBH Forum, you are MVP. And to the audience out there in Zoom land, Kristen and I thank you. We're grateful to you for tuning in, for your questions. We hope we've beefed up your reading list and your passion for American sports and its stars. A very good evening to all. Kristen, thank you to you. You have a good night too.